Well, if you're like me, you've probably never heard of the Chagos Islands, let alone know where it is. But it's now at the centre of public debate in the UK and Mauritius. Now, firstly, here's where the island group lies, practically in the middle of the Indian Ocean between Africa, Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent. And its biggest island is Diego Garcia. The closest large landmass to its west is Madagascar, around 3,000 kilometers away, and to its east is Java, Indonesia, around 3,700 kilometers away. Now, the Chagos have been controlled by the UK since the early 1800s, but just last week, the Prime Minister in Britain announced it's giving sovereignty back to one of its former colonies, Mauritius. It's part of a deal between the two countries to secure the future of a key US military base on Diego Garcia, while granting islanders who were displaced by the British in the 1970s to make way for the base the very right to return. Well, for more on what's happening on the Chagos Islands, I'm joined by Dr Anamika Twyman-Ghoshal, lecturer at Brunel University in London. Dr Twyman-Ghoshal, really good to have you on the program. Now, firstly, why is the UK handing sovereignty to Mauritius, and why are politicians only now paying attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. Hello, and thank you for having me. So the decolonization of Mauritius, which started in the 60s, really was incomplete while the Chagos archipelago was retained by the British. In fact, what the British did is separate Mauritius, which was a former colony, and Chagos was considered part of that, and they recolonized it and renamed it the British Indian Ocean Territory in 1965. The story, however, begins a little bit earlier, when in 1958, the United States identified that Diego Garcia would be an ideal place for a naval base for the United States, and approached the United Kingdom in order to secure that island for the naval base so that the United States could use that.
And of course, there were Chagos Islanders who were displaced from the main island of Diego Garcia to make way for the US base. Many ended up in the Seychelles and Mauritius. Now, the deal states that they have the rights to return, but will they return?
It's a really good question. So, in fact, in 2000, the UK did a feasibility report to see if the Chagosians could be returned to the archipelago. And it said, yes, that was feasible. However, then in 2002, a second feasibility report said, yes, that they could be repatriated to Peros Baños and Solomon Islands, which are two of the secondary islands. So Diego Garcia is the largest island, as you mentioned earlier. However, it stated it would be very precarious and expensive. This was then followed in 2004 by an order in council, which is done behind Parliament. So it's not actually open up to Parliament. It's done through royal prerogative, that prohibited the Chagosians from returning to all of the archipelago. So it's a really big question. In the agreement, at least in the press release that has come out of the Mauritius and out of the United Kingdom, it says that they have the freedom to implement, that Mauritius will have the freedom to implement a program of resettlement for the Chagosians. But whether that actually will be happening is another question, and the costs of that is another major question. Who's going to bear those costs, and also what sort of livelihood would Chagosians be given on either of the secondary islands? Because it certainly wouldn't be Diego Garcia, which is where most of the islanders have come from, is from Diego Garcia, and they're prohibited from returning there, and actually also prohibited from working on the US naval base. Any other nationality is allowed, but Chagosians are not allowed.
Yeah, and the deal has it that Britain retains administration of Diego Garcia, cementing the future of that base you've just been talking about. But why did Mauritius accept that aspect of it, and why was it crucial for Britain to retain that control?
It's a very particular location in terms of sort of strategic location for the United States, and the UK supports that. So in terms of why Mauritius accepted that, it's very hard for me to say. I was not there in those negotiations, so I cannot hazard a guess, apart from the fact that when the agreement was made with Mauritius to separate the Chagos Islands from Mauritius, when they were granted independence under the Lancaster Agreement, it was very much part of independence that they would have to agree to the Chagos Islands being separated from Mauritian territory. I would presume that there was some negotiation here that really would the islands be repatriated had Mauritius not agreed to this? Probably not.
Yeah, and what's in it for Mauritius in general?
So there is some financial incentive that seems to be part of this. So there is going to be some yearly support from the British government given to Mauritius for this enduring lease, which initially is for 99 years with an option for extension, which again is very similar to the previous agreement that had been done for the British Indian Ocean Territory. So we do not know what those sums are or what that's going to look like, but there does seem to be some sort of financial element to it.
Yeah, and well before the Prime Minister Keir Starmer made this announcement, there were already fears from Britain that Mauritius would allow access to China, to the territory. And are those fears justified?
Again, that is something that I wouldn't be privy to because these are conversations that are happening behind closed doors. It is an interesting question. I mean, the focus for me really is what about the Chagosians and what are their rights here? They were not privy to any of these conversations. And again, it's hard to talk about Chagosians as a monolith, but the fact that they were once again not privy to these conversations, just like they were not privy to the conversations when they were forcibly evicted from the territory starting in 1967. All the way through to the early 1973 when it was completed. So again, the question is, can they be repatriated?
Yeah, we're seeing pictures of Chagosians protesting in London, but who's taking up their cause? Anyone notable that might be able to bring up their issues?
There have been a couple of MPs who have stood with Chagosians and the community, but again, I think this would be a good conversation to have with Chagosians who have largely been excluded from these conversations altogether. And again, not all Chagosians agree whether they want to be repatriated. Some do, some don't. Some of them are quite happy to stay where they are. However, again, I think including their voices is one of the major problems here.
And finally, one other aspect of this deal is the formation of a marine protection zone. Could you tell us more about that and what this means for the islands and for Mauritius?
Yes, absolutely. So again, when I mentioned earlier about the feasibility studies about repatriation, soon after that, that order in council that prohibited the repatriation of Chagosians to the islands, in 2010, the UK established a marine protected area. And this protected area is really interesting. And there absolutely is an importance to protecting the environment there, particularly with climate change. However, what was interesting about the marine protected area, which is one of the largest that we have in the world, it prohibits commercial fishing, which again questions how would Chagosians be able to support themselves if they were relocated back to those two other islands. And what is also really interesting about the marine protected area is that it has excluded Diego Garcia, which is the naval base, which actually creates most of the pollution in the area. There have been conversations. Mauritius had in 2022 convened a meeting in order to create a Mauritian marine protected area. So that would go from being British to Mauritian. And those conversations supposedly have included some Chagosian voices, but again, it's all very blurry in terms of what those details look like and whether that would actually prohibit all forms of commercial fishing, including those by Chagosians themselves.
Okay, we will stay in touch with what's happening in the coming weeks and months. Dr. Anamika Twyman-Ghoshal, thanks very much for your analysis.
Thank you very much.